My mom changed the locks and told me I had no home, so I took half the house legally. My name is Eliana Brooks, and I'm 25 years old. The story I'm about to tell you is true. It's about family, money, and the quietest, coldest kind of betrayal you can imagine. It's about how the people who are supposed to love you the most can decide one day that you are no longer useful to them. But it's also about what happens when you stop crying and start keeping receipts. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from. I still remember that text. The words burned themselves onto the back of my eyes. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. There was no explanation. There was no warning. There wasn't a phone call or a tearful argument. Just that cold little message, lighting up the dark screen of my phone. A final judgment delivered in a sterile blue bubble. I was standing in the parking lot of my small apartment building, the one I could barely afford on my own. The Seattle rain was coming down in a fine, persistent mist, making the pavement slick and shiny under the orange glow of the streetlights. I held my phone in my hand, and for a second I thought the heat I felt was real, that it might actually burn through my skin. My mom had always been dramatic. Everything was a crisis, a performance. A broken dish was a tragedy. A missed phone call was a personal slight. But this felt different. This wasn't drama. This was an execution. It was quiet, efficient, and final. For 25 years, she had drilled one lesson into my head. Family meant loyalty. Love meant sacrifice. You give, and you don't keep score, because that's what family does. I believed her. I lived by her rules. I sacrificed, I gave. I never ever kept score. I patched the walls. I paid the bills. I put my own life on hold. All because I thought that's what a good daughter did. I thought it was earning my place. It turned out I was just paying rent. She locked me out because she thought I was weak. She thought I would cry, beg, and eventually break. She expected me to come crawling back, asking for forgiveness for a crime I didn't even know I had committed. She thought I was the same helpless little girl who believed all her stories. But here's the part she didn't see coming. I wasn't that girl anymore. 2 months later, I walked into a sterile mediation office. I wasn't there to cry or to yell. I walked in with proof. I walked in with confidence. And I walked in with a lawyer who didn't believe in family drama, only in financial equity. By the time it was over, my mother had lost half of everything she tried so desperately to lock me out of. She taught me to be strong, to be independent, to handle my own problems. She just never imagined that one day she would be the problem I had to handle. From the street, we were the perfect American family. We lived in a lovely 2-story white house in a quiet Seattle suburb, the kind with a neatly trimmed lawn and a big oak tree out front. We even had a golden retriever named Duke who would bark happily whenever a car drove by. People in the neighborhood would see my mom, Lorraine, tending to her roses, my dad washing his car on a Sunday, and me or my brother Mason helping with the yard work. They'd smile and say, "You guys are the dream family." They had no idea what the dream was built on. Inside that house, love wasn't a feeling. It was a transaction, and the currency was obedience. My mom was the director, the producer, and the lead actor of our family's little stage play. Everyone had a role to play and lines to recite. My dad's role was to be the quiet, hard-working husband who was always too tired to argue. His agreement came in the form of silence. My younger brother Mason was the golden child. He was brilliant, charming, and destined for great things. Nothing he ever did was wrong. It was just a learning experience. My role was the fixer. I was the reliable one, the responsible one. Eliana, the family's built-in handyman, financial planner, and emotional shock absorber. It started small. When I was 16, the garbage disposal broke. My mom let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, this is just what I needed," she said, pressing a hand to her forehead. My dad grunted from his armchair, eyes on the TV. "I'll look at it this weekend," he mumbled, which was his code for never. Mason was in his room, studying, a protected activity that made him immune to all household chores. So I went online. I watched 3 different video tutorials, figured out how to unjam it with an Allen wrench, and reset the motor. When I was done, my mom patted my cheek. "See? What would we do without you, honey?" It felt good. It felt like I was needed, like I was contributing something vital. But that feeling came with a price tag. "What would we do without you?" Slowly turned into a justification for everything. Hold the ladder while I clean the gutters, Eliana. Your father's back is acting up. Can you patch the drywall in the hallway, Eliana? Mason accidentally put a hole in it, and he's so stressed about his exams. That utility bill is due, sweetheart. Can you cover it? Just until next week, I promise. Next week always became next month. Then next year. Promises were just words my mother used to smooth over the present moment. They had no future value. By the time I was 23, I had a full-time job as an administrative assistant downtown. I still lived at home, a fact my mother presented to others as a sign of our wonderful, close-knit family. Eliana just can't bear to leave us, she'd say with a laugh. The truth was, I couldn't afford to leave. Most of my salary wasn't going into a savings account for my own apartment. It was being absorbed by the family home. I paid for half of the roof repairs after a bad winter storm. I covered the bill when the water heater died. I even started covering a portion of the mortgage each month when my dad's hours were cut at his job. It was always framed as a temporary measure. Just to help us get back on our feet, Mom would say. But we never seemed to land on our feet. We were just perpetually stumbling, and I was the crutch holding everyone up. The biggest expense was Mason. When he got into the University of Washington, my parents were ecstatic. They were also terrified of the cost. The solution, as always, was me. It wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration. At a family dinner, my mom laid out the plan. I would contribute a significant portion of my income to Mason's tuition and living expenses. It's an investment in his future, she said, smiling at me across the table. And that's an investment in this family's future. Mason just stared at his plate, a faint blush on his cheeks. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My dad just nodded slowly. It's the right thing to do, Eliana. For 2 years, I did it. I worked overtime. I packed my own lunches every single day. I said no to friends who wanted to go out. My life shrank down to work and home, and the endless cycle of bills. I was running on a treadmill, convinced I was helping the whole family move forward. The idea that my contributions should be formally recognized came to me slowly. It felt selfish at first, a violation of the family code. But I had poured tens of thousands of dollars into this property. It was more than just helping out. I was a major financial stakeholder. I found my mom in the kitchen one Saturday morning. I had rehearsed what I was going to say, trying to make it sound casual and reasonable. Mom, I started, my hands feeling clammy. Since I've been helping with the mortgage and all the big repairs for a while now, I was thinking, maybe it would make sense to add my name to the house deed. Just for legal purposes, you know? She was wiping the counter and she didn't stop. She didn't even look at me. She just kept wiping in slow, deliberate circles. Finally, she paused and gave me that practiced, pitying smile. It was a smile that made me feel like a naive child asking for something utterly ridiculous. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That's so sweet. But that's not how family works. You don't put your name on family." I just stood there, confused. "I don't understand." "It would just protect my investment." "It's not an investment, Eliana. It's your contribution. It's what you do for your family because you love them," she said, her tone hardening just enough to let me know the conversation was over. "We don't keep score." I walked away with a cold knot in my stomach. She was right. We didn't keep score, because if we did, they would be hopelessly in my debt. It was the first time I realized that their definition of family was a one-way street, and I was paying for the pavement. Turns out when she said, "You don't put your name on family," she meant it literally. My name would never be on anything that mattered. The foundation of my world didn't crumble in an earthquake. It was eroded by whispers, until one day it just gave way. It started with small things. My mom would get off the phone quickly when I walked into a room. My dad and Mason would stop talking, their conversation hanging in the air like smoke. They were having meetings I wasn't invited to, in the house I was paying for. A chill had entered the home, and it had nothing to do with the Seattle weather. I felt like a guest, a polite stranger whose presence was tolerated, but not entirely welcome. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in October. I was working late, trying to catch up on a project my boss had dumped on me at the last minute. It was almost 10 by the time I pulled into the driveway. The house was mostly dark, except for the warm glow of the light over the kitchen sink. I was exhausted. All I wanted was a glass of water and my bed. I came in through the side door, the one that led into the laundry room next to the kitchen. I was quiet, trying not to wake anyone. But as I set my bag down, I heard voices from the other side of the door. My mom's voice, low and conspiratorial. She thinks all her help means something, she was saying. The words were sharp, coated in a layer of contempt that I had never heard directed at me before. She has no idea what this house is worth now. When we sell, it's our names on the papers. That's all that matters. My chest went cold. It felt like I'd been plunged into icy water. Sell the house? The words echoed in my head. The house I'd poured my youth, my energy, and every spare dollar I had into for years. The house that was supposed to be our family's anchor. My dad's low chuckle followed, a sound that broke my heart more than my mother's words. It was the sound of betrayal. "She's naive, Lorraine," he said, his voice thick with a kind of weary amusement. "Always has been. Thinks with her heart." Then I heard Mason's voice, quieter than theirs, but just as damning. "She'll lose her mind if she finds out." There was no concern in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about the drama I might cause. My mother laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, utterly devoid of warmth. "Then let her," she said with a dismissive wave I could picture perfectly in my mind. "She's a survivor. She'll survive," and that was it. That was the moment everything became clear. I wasn't family anymore. I was inventory. I was an asset that had been used up, and now they were preparing to liquidate. My contributions weren't acts of love to them. They were just convenient cash infusions that made their lives easier. My naivete wasn't something to be cherished. It was something to be exploited. I stood there in the dark laundry room, my hand on the doorknob, and I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of a glass being set on the counter. They were in there, my family, casually discussing the demolition of my life as if they were talking about the weather. I backed away from the door silently. I didn't confront them. What was the point? The truth was already out. Yelling and crying wouldn't change it. It would just give my mother the drama she thrived on. It would make me the hysterical daughter, the emotional one who was overreacting. They would deny everything, gaslight me, and tell me I had misunderstood. No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I went upstairs to my room, the one I had painted myself, with the squeaky floorboard I had promised to fix. I moved with a strange, calm detachment. The shock had frozen my grief, leaving behind a hard, clear purpose. I pulled out the old suitcase from the back of my closet and began to pack. I took my clothes, my books, my laptop. I took the few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me. I left everything else. I left the photos on the wall. I left the furniture. I left the girl who had tried so hard to be a good daughter. Before the sun came up, I was ready. I carried my suitcase downstairs, my steps silent on the carpet. I walked into the kitchen. It was empty now, clean and quiet. It looked so normal, so peaceful. It was a perfect stage set, and the actors were all asleep. I took the house key off my keychain. It felt heavy in my hand, like a piece of shrapnel. I placed it on the granite countertop, right in the center where no one could miss it. Beside it, I left a simple note written on a piece of paper from my wallet. It had only 5 words. "You're right. I'll survive." Then I walked out the front door and didn't look back. The first week was a blur. I stayed on a friend's couch, telling her I just needed a little space from my family. I didn't tell her the whole story. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat, heavy and sharp like broken glass. I spent my days at work, functioning on autopilot, and my nights staring at the ceiling, the overheard conversation playing on a loop in my mind. Despite everything, a small, foolish part of me expected a phone call, an apology, a frantic message from my mom asking where I was. But my phone remained silent. The silence was its own kind of message. It said, "We don't need you. We don't even miss you." After a week of sleeping in someone else's living room, I knew I had to go back. Not to stay, not to argue, but to get the rest of my things. There were practical items I needed, like my birth certificate and social security card from the file cabinet in my dad's office. And there were sentimental things, like the box of my grandmother's old photographs I kept in my closet. I couldn't leave those behind. I decided to go on a Saturday afternoon. I figured they'd be out running errands. I just wanted to get in and get out without a confrontation. I drove my car down the familiar street, my stomach twisting into a tight, painful knot. The house looked exactly the same. The lawn was mowed. The windows were clean, a perfect picture of domestic peace. I walked up the porch steps, my old house key feeling strange and foreign in my hand. I took a deep breath and slid it into the lock of the front door. It wouldn't turn. I jiggled it, thinking it was just stuck. I pulled it out and put it back in. Nothing. It was like pushing a key into a solid piece of metal. My heart started to pound against my ribs. I tried the back door, the one leading into the kitchen. Same result. The key went in, but the lock wouldn't budge. They had changed the locks. The reality of it settled over me, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate, calculated action. They had actively worked to bar me from the home I grew up in, the home I had helped pay for, the porch light I had fixed just last year, replacing the frayed wiring myself, flickered weakly overhead. A sick sense of irony washed over me. I raised my hand and knocked on the door, the sound echoing hollowly. "Hello?" I called out. "Mom? Dad?" "It's me." Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "I just need to get the rest of my things." "It will only take a minute," no one answered. But I knew they were in there. I could see the flicker of the television through the living room window. They were sitting inside, listening to me knock and doing nothing. They were waiting for me to go away. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. It was a text message from Mom. My breath caught in my chest. For a wild, stupid second, I thought it might be an apology. I opened it. The words lit up the screen, stark and brutal. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how independent you really are." And at the end of the sentence, she had added a laughing emoji. A little yellow face crying with laughter. I just stared at it. The text, the emoji, the casual, vicious cruelty of it all. It wasn't enough to lock me out. She had to mock me too. She had to turn my pain into a punchline. For a long time, I didn't move. I didn't cry. The rain started to fall again, a soft drizzle that soaked into my jacket, but I barely felt it. All the hurt, all the grief, all the shock I had been suppressing for the past week seemed to evaporate, burned away by the cold fire of that message. Something inside me settled. It wasn't anger, not the hot, screaming kind, and it wasn't sadness. It was something harder, clearer. It was resolve. She wanted to see how independent I really was. She thought she was delivering a final blow, a punishment that would leave me broken on her doorstep. She had no idea what she had just done. She hadn't broken me. She had released me. She had severed the last frayed thread of obligation that tied me to them. I lowered my phone, took one last look at the locked door of the house that was no longer mine, and turned around. As I walked back to my car in the rain, I whispered a single word to myself. A promise and a plan? Okay, that night, sitting on the floor of my friend's apartment with my laptop balanced on my knees, the word okay became my mission. It was no longer a sound of defeat. It was the starting pistol for a race they didn't even know I was running. My mother's cruelty had given me an unexpected gift, clarity. There were no more complicated family emotions to navigate, no more guilt or obligation. There was only a transaction that had gone bad, and I was going to correct the balance sheet. For years, I had been the one who managed the family finances. It was another one of my fixer jobs. My mom hated paperwork, and my dad claimed he was no good with numbers. So every month, I was the one who sat down at the kitchen table, organized the bills, managed the online banking, and made sure nothing was late. They thought it was just another chore they had successfully delegated. They never realized they were handing me all the evidence I would ever need. I opened my laptop that night and started digging. I went through years of my own online banking history, my credit card statements, my email archives. It was a painful, meticulous process. Every transaction was a memory, a reminder of a sacrifice. There was the email I sent to the roofing company with the subject line, "Final payment confirmation." Inside was the receipt for $1,200, paid directly from my savings account. I remembered eating instant noodles for months to build that savings back up. I found the series of bank transfers to a foundation repair specialist. The total was $8,900. I remembered the panic when we found a crack in the basement wall and the condescending way the contractor spoke to my mom. I was the one who dealt with him, who negotiated the price, and who ultimately paid the bill. Then came the mortgage contributions. For 3 years, I had been transferring money directly to my parents' mortgage account. It was a set amount every single month without fail. The total came to $46,000. Each transfer was labeled family support in the memo line. The list went on and on. Utilities, property taxes, renovations. I had paid for the new water-efficient dishwasher because my mom wanted to go green. I had paid to have the giant oak tree in the front yard professionally pruned so a heavy branch wouldn't fall on the house. I had paid for the materials to repaint the entire exterior one summer, and I had done most of the painting myself. Everything was traceable. Every receipt, every payment, every email confirmation was a digital breadcrumb leading back to my bank account. By 4 a.m, my eyes were burning from staring at the screen, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I had a detailed spreadsheet open, which I had titled, with a grim sense of satisfaction, The Ledger of Truth. I created 2 main columns. The first was titled, Contributions by E. Brooks. Underneath, I listed every single payment I had made toward that house, complete with dates, amounts, and a short description. The total at the bottom was staggering. It was far more than I had even realized. It was a number that represented my entire adult life's work. The second column was titled, Promises and Agreements. Here, I documented the verbal contracts, the constant reassurances that this was our house, that my help was an investment in the family's future. This column was harder to quantify, but it was just as important. It was the context. It was the proof of intent. I wasn't doing this to make them feel guilty. Guilt was a currency they didn't trade in. I wasn't going to wave these papers in their face and demand an apology. I was past that. This was no longer a family dispute. It was a business deal, and I had been cheated. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of an emotional breakdown. I was going to take what was mine, legally, and I was going to use the very skills they had relied on for years. My organization, my attention to detail, my ability to fix a problem, to do it. My mother wanted to see how independent I could be. I was about to give her a master class. The first 2 lawyers I met with were men in expensive suits who offered me lukewarm coffee and placating smiles. They listened to my story with a kind of detached sympathy, like doctors diagnosing a common cold. The first one, a portly man named Mr. Gable, leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. "It's a tough situation, Ms. Brooks, really tough," he said, his voice smooth and condescending. "But these are family matters. The courts are very reluctant to get involved in what are essentially verbal agreements between parents and a child. My advice? Try to talk to them. Maybe some family counseling." He said the word counseling as if it were a prescription for a mild sedative. He saw a hysterical daughter, not a client with a financial case. He charged me a $300 consultation fee to tell me I should talk about my feelings. The second lawyer, younger and more ambitious, saw an angle, but the wrong one. "We could sue for emotional distress," he suggested, his eyes lighting up. "Paint them as cruel, manipulative parents. It would be a messy fight, a real battle in the press, maybe. But you could get a settlement." He wanted drama. He wanted a public spectacle. He didn't seem to understand that the last thing I wanted was to turn my pain into a performance. I wasn't looking for pity money. I was looking for what was rightfully mine. I thanked him for his time and walked out, feeling more defeated than when I went in. I was starting to lose hope. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a family issue. Maybe my mother's final, cruel laugh was the end of the story. But then a colleague at work, who had gone through a complicated business dissolution, gave me a name. "Go see Sarah Carter," she said. "She doesn't waste time and she eats spreadsheets for breakfast." Miss Carter's office was nothing like the others. It was in a modest building downtown, with a view of the gray Seattle sky instead of the Puget Sound. The space was functional, clean and completely devoid of personal touches, except for a single thriving orchid on her desk. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and silver hair pulled back into a severe bun. She didn't smile when I came in. She just gestured to the chair opposite her desk and said, "Eliana Brooks, you have 30 minutes. Please begin." There was no small talk. I laid out the story as simply and directly as I could, just like I had for the other 2. I explained my role in the family, the financial contributions, the overheard conversation, the note I left, and finally, the text message. I pushed my printed-out spreadsheet, the ledger of truth, across the desk toward her. She didn't interrupt me once. She just listened, her gaze fixed on me, her expression unreadable. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. Unlike the other lawyers, she didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She picked up my folder and began to flip through the pages. I watched her eyes scan the columns of my spreadsheet, her focus absolute. She turned the pages of bank statements, receipts, and email confirmations I had painstakingly printed and organized. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up at me. Her eyes were different now. They weren't cold. They were focused, like a predator that has just caught the scent of its prey. "This isn't a family issue," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "This is equity." I just stared at her, blinking. The word hung in the air between us. "Equity?" She nodded, a small, sharp movement of her head. "You contributed a significant amount of capital and labor to the maintenance and improvement of a property with the explicit, or reasonably implied, promise of a long-term benefit, namely, a place to live, an inheritance, or a stake in the home. They accepted your contributions for years, fully aware of this shared understanding. Then they took steps to deny you that benefit and remove you from the property with malicious intent." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the spreadsheet. "This isn't a daughter helping her parents. This is an informal business partnership. You were a contributing partner. They can't just lock you out and liquidate your investment for their sole benefit. That's called unjust enrichment." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. She wasn't seeing a hurt little girl. She was seeing the truth, written in black and white. She was seeing the numbers, and the numbers didn't lie. "So, I have a case?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You have a very strong case," she corrected me. "Their biggest mistake wasn't their greed. It was their arrogance. They assumed you were too emotionally invested to be methodical. They assumed you wouldn't have proof." She leaned forward slightly. "And the text message?" I slid my phone across the desk. The screen opened to my mother's cruel words and the laughing emoji. She picked it up and read it. A very slight, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of her lips. It was a smile of pure professional satisfaction. "Well," she said, placing the phone back on the desk with a decisive click. "That's Exhibit A. It proves intent to permanently and maliciously dispossess you. It's the nail in their coffin." She explained the strategy. "We wouldn't sue for emotional distress. We would file a petition for partition of real property. We'd assert a claim for a constructive trust, arguing that they held a portion of the property's value in trust for me because of my financial contributions. It was a legal argument, not an emotional one. It was clean. It was powerful. They will receive a letter from my office requesting mediation," she concluded, already making notes on a legal pad. "We will present our evidence and offer them a choice. Either they agree to a settlement where you receive your equitable share of the property's value, or we will take this before a judge. Given what you've shown me, I don't advise they take it before a judge." I walked out of her office an hour later, the gray Seattle sky somehow looking brighter. I hadn't cried. I hadn't raised my voice. I had simply presented the facts. And for the first time, someone had looked at those facts and called them by their true name. Not a family problem, but an injustice. 3 months later, I was sitting in a sterile, windowless conference room in a downtown mediation center. The air was thick with a tense, artificial silence, broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system. The room was beige, the table was beige, and the lukewarm water in the plastic cups was probably beige, too. It was a room designed for conflict resolution. A place stripped of all character so that only the raw facts could exist. I was dressed in a simple navy blue blazer and slacks. Ms. Carter had advised me to look professional, calm, and serious. It wasn't hard. I felt a strange sense of calm like the eye of a storm. All the turmoil and pain had churned for months. But in this room, at this moment, I was perfectly still. I was here to present a case, not to have a family argument. Across the long, polished table sat my parents and my brother Mason. They looked out of place, like actors who had wandered onto the wrong set. My mother, Lorraine, was wearing a floral dress, her face arranged in an expression of pained, sorrowful concern. It was her martyr look, one I knew well. My dad just looked tired, his shoulders slumped, his eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table in front of him. Mason sat beside them, fidgeting with a pen, his gaze darting everywhere except at me. They were whispering frantically to their lawyer, a man who looked flustered and unprepared. The mediator, a calm, neutral man in his 60s, sat at the head of the table. He explained the process in a dry monotone. This was a non-binding session intended to find a resolution and avoid a costly court battle. When he finished, my mother gave me a watery, pleading smile. "Eliana, honey," she began, her voice quivering just so. "You didn't have to do this. We could have talked this out. We're family." I met her gaze, and my voice came out quiet, steady, and clear. It held no anger, no pleading. It held only fact. "You changed the locks," I said. Her smile faltered. The performance had just met a critic who refused to play along. My dad cleared his throat, finally looking up. "It was just a misunderstanding, Ellie," he muttered, using my childhood nickname. It was a clumsy attempt to pull me back into the role of their little girl. "There was no misunderstanding," I said, my eyes still on my mother. The text message was very clear. My parents' lawyer, a Mr. Davison, tried to take control. He puffed out his chest and said, "Now, let's not get sidetracked by emotional reactions." My clients were simply trying to establish boundaries after their daughter abruptly left home. Ms. Carter didn't even look at him. She addressed the mediator directly. "My client did not abruptly leave home," she stated, her voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "She left after discovering a plan to sell the family property and dispossess her of her substantial financial investment in it." Mr. Davison scoffed. "Investment? She was an adult child living at home. She occasionally helped with bills. That's called rent." Ms. Carter responded by placing a thick 3-ring binder on the table. The sound it made was loud and final. She pushed it toward the center. "This is a detailed ledger of Ms. Brooks's direct payments toward the property, its maintenance, and its improvements over the last 7 years. She opened the binder. "I draw your attention to Tab A. Bank records confirming direct transfers to the mortgage account totaling $46,000. Tab B. Receipts and credit card statements for a new roof, $12,400. Tab C. Payment records for foundation repairs, $8,900. Tab D. 2 years of tuition payments for Mason Brooks, paid directly from my client's salary. While not a direct contribution to the property, it demonstrates the pattern of Ms. Brooks serving as the family's primary financial support, freeing up her parents' income to be used for the mortgage. The documented total of direct contributions to the house itself is $84,712. A dead silence fell over the room. My dad's face had gone pale. Mason stared at the binder as if it were a venomous snake. My mother's expression of sorrow was gone, replaced by a tight, pinched look of disbelief. Ms. Carter wasn't finished. She calmly picked up a single sheet of paper from her folder. "And then we have this," she said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing all focus to her. "A message sent by Mrs. Lorraine Brooks to my client at 9:42 p.m. on October 14th. She looked directly at my mother. It states, and I quote, "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how independent you really are." It is followed by an emoticon indicating laughter. She placed the paper on the table. The little yellow emoji seemed to stare up from the page, a grotesque, smiling indictment. The mediator adjusted his glasses and picked up the paper. He read it, then looked at my mother. His neutral expression had hardened. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice now holding a distinct edge of disapproval. "A message like this demonstrates clear and premeditated intent to permanently remove a resident and financial contributor from the property. In the eyes of the law, this is not a simple family squabble over boundaries," my mother sputtered. I was angry. She left without a word. "It was just a text message, for heaven's sake." "A text message," Ms. Carter interjected smoothly. "That is now Exhibit A in a legal filing. A text message that will be very compelling to a judge when we argue that my client was a victim of malicious dispossession and that her financial contributions must be returned to her in the form of an equitable lien against the property." Their lawyer, Mr. Davison, was turning pale. He leaned over and whispered urgently to my parents. I couldn't hear what he said, but I saw the panic in their eyes. They had walked in here expecting to deal with their emotional, hysterical daughter. They had expected tears and accusations, a scene they could manage and manipulate. They had not expected a binder full of facts. They had not expected a lawyer who spoke only in numbers and legal precedents. They had come for a family drama, and I had brought them a corporate audit. Mr. Davison finally looked up, his face grim. He cleared his throat and spoke to the mediator, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," he whispered, though everyone in the silent room could hear him. "We have a problem." The mediation session ended without an agreement, but the tide had turned. My parents' lawyer had asked for time to review the documentation. It was a code phrase for panic and try to figure out how much trouble we're in. In the weeks that followed, Ms. Carter's office received a series of lowball settlement offers. First, they offered to give me back the money I had spent on the roof. Then, they offered to pay me back for the roof and the foundation, but without interest. Each offer was a desperate attempt to make the problem go away for as little money as possible. Each offer was a quiet admission of their guilt. Ms. Carter advised me to reject them all. "They are testing your resolve," she explained over the phone. "They still believe they can wear you down. We will not be worn down. We will hold firm to our original petition. 50% of the home's current market value, reflecting your role as a de facto partner in the property." The waiting was the hardest part. For 6 long weeks, my life was in limbo. I went to work, I ate, I slept, but my mind was always on the case. There were nights when doubt crept in, a cold whisper in the dark. What if a judge didn't see it my way? What if the lawyers were right, and it was all just a family issue? What if I had done all this for nothing? But whenever the doubt became too loud, I would pull out my phone and look at the text message from my mother. I would look at that laughing emoji. It was a perfect, crystalline reminder of why I was doing this. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the truth. It was about her laughing at my pain, so certain of her power over me. This fight wasn't about revenge. It was about rescinding her power. The final decision didn't come in a dramatic courtroom scene with a gavel slamming down. It came in a quiet, unassuming email on a Tuesday morning. I was at my desk at work, sipping my coffee, when the notification popped up on my screen. The subject line read, "Regarding Brooks vs. Brooks, ruling." My hands started to tremble. I clicked it open. The email was from Ms. Carter. It was brief and to the point, just like her. Eliana, the mediator, has issued his binding recommendation, which both parties agreed to accept to avoid a formal court trial. The recommendation has been accepted and signed off by the judge. You have been granted a 50% equitable share in the property located at 125 Willow Creek Lane. The defendants are ordered to either buy out your share at current market value within 90 days, or the property is to be listed for sale, with the proceeds to be divided equally after the mortgage, and any liens are settled. Congratulations. We won. Sarah. I read the words once, then twice, then a third time. We won. A wave of something washed over me, but it wasn't elation. It wasn't the triumphant joy I had imagined. It was a profound, bone-deep sense of relief, like a soldier putting down a heavy pack after a long march. The fight was over. The truth had been validated, not by my family, but by the cold, impartial machinery of the law. The final meeting to sign the papers was as sterile and uncomfortable as the first. We were in a different conference room, but the atmosphere was the same. My parents and Mason were already there when Ms. Carter and I arrived. They looked different, defeated. My mother's performance was over. She sat in silence, her hands clenched in her lap, her face a mask of bitter resentment. She refused to look at me. Her silence on the stand during depositions, her inability to explain away the text message or the financial records, had sealed her fate. She had been given the stage, and for the first time in her life, she had no lines. My dad just looked old. He avoided my eyes completely, staring at a spot on the wall behind my head. He signed the documents where their lawyer told him to, his hand moving slowly, as if the pen were incredibly heavy. I wondered if he was thinking about all the times he stood by and said nothing, all the times his silence had been his consent. Mason just looked lost. He wasn't a party to the signing, but he was there as family support. He kept looking from me to our parents and back again, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. I think a part of him still didn't understand how it had come to this. He had always been the protected one, the one for whom sacrifices were made. He had never had to look at the price tag. When it was over, there were no handshakes, no final words. They got up and left, a broken little unit shuffling out of a room that held the wreckage of their choices. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I just walked outside with Ms. Carter. The crisp Seattle air hit my face, stinging my cheeks. I looked up at the gray sky, at the clouds moving slowly overhead, and I took the first deep, truly free breath I had taken in years. I had stood up for myself. Not with screams or tears, but with spreadsheets and evidence. I had met their emotional chaos with cold, hard logic. I whispered the words into the wind, a final thought for the family I was leaving behind. You taught me to handle everything myself. I just finally listened. They decided to sell the house. I knew they would. Buying me out would have required a humility my mother didn't possess, and it would have been a daily, bitter reminder that I had won. Selling was easier. It was a way to erase the past, to cut their losses and pretend the whole chapter had never happened. A few weeks after the ruling, a for sale sign appeared on the neatly manicured lawn of 125 Willow Creek Lane. I saw it once. I was driving home from work and took a detour down my old street, a strange compulsion pulling me there. The house looked smaller than I remembered, just a building made of wood and shingles. The rose bushes my mother was so proud of seemed to be wilting. Seeing that sign didn't bring me sadness or nostalgia. It just brought a quiet sense of closure. It was no longer a home filled with ghosts and bad memories. It was just a property, an asset being liquidated, exactly as they had always seen it. The housing market in Seattle was strong. The house sold quickly and for a good price. After the remaining mortgage was paid, along with the legal fees and taxes, the final amount was wired to my account. It was a number so large it didn't feel real. It represented years of my work, my sacrifice, my naivete. But now, it also represented my freedom. My parents walked away with half of what they had expected to get from the sale. Enough to buy a small condo in a less expensive part of town, but not enough for the comfortable early retirement they had been planning, the one that was supposed to be funded by my unpaid labor. I heard through a mutual family acquaintance that my mother told people they had downsized to simplify their lives. The performance, it seemed, would always go on. The other half, my half, changed my life. I didn't go on a lavish vacation or buy a fancy car. The first thing I did was find my own place. I spent weeks with a real estate agent, looking at small townhouses, condos, and apartments. And then I found it. A small, two-bedroom townhouse overlooking Lake Union. It wasn't huge, it wasn't grand, but it had a small balcony where you could watch the seaplanes take off, and the afternoon sun flooded the living room with light. The day I got the keys was surreal. I walked up to my own front door, of my own home that I had bought with my own money. Money I had fought for. I stood there for a long moment, the cool metal of the keys heavy in my palm. They felt different from the key to my parents' house. That key had felt like a leash. These felt like wings. The first thing I did when I walked inside? I called a locksmith. An hour later, a friendly man in a blue jumpsuit was rekeying all the locks. He had no idea of the significance of his work. To him, it was just another job. But to me, it was a sacred ritual. As I watched him expertly take apart the old lock and replace it with a new, shiny brass one, I felt the last bit of fear and obligation fall away from me. When he was done, he handed me a set of brand new keys. "All set, miss," he said with a smile. I took them, and a real, genuine smile spread across my face. I had changed the locks, not out of fear that my parents would show up. I knew they wouldn't. Their pride wouldn't allow it. I changed them out of a deep, profound need for peace. I did it to reclaim the very act that had been used to wound me. My mother had changed the locks to tell me I was worthless, that I had no home. I was changing them to tell myself that I was safe, that I was in control, and that this space was mine and mine alone. Those keys weren't just for a door. They weren't just pieces of metal. They were keys to my freedom, to my future, to a life built on my own terms. As I stood in my empty living room, with the smell of fresh paint in the air and the sun streaming through the window, I finally understood what a home was supposed to feel like. It wasn't a place you had to earn. It was a place you belonged. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fireworks and a cheering crowd. It doesn't always arrive in a dramatic cinematic climax. Sometimes it's a quiet ruling in a beige conference room. Sometimes it's a number appearing in your bank account. Sometimes it's the simple, satisfying sound of a new lock clicking shut. My mother once sent me a text message that said, "You don't have a home anymore." She meant it to be an ending, a final, cruel word on my life, but she was wrong. Now I have one. And it's a home that is truly mine. It's not built on obligation or guilt. It's not maintained by obedience or silent sacrifice. It's built on truth, not manipulation. It's built on spreadsheets and receipts, and the quiet courage to demand what you are worth. If you've ever felt trapped, used, or betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ashes of a relationship that was supposed to last forever, you are not alone. Tell me your story in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge and hard-earned peace.